Hello, everybody. We'll just give a few minutes to for people to come in, and then we'll start. Hi, everybody. We'll just give people a couple more minutes, and then we're going to start the webinar. Thank you. What's the weather like, Jozsef, in Budapest right now?
Well, it's early spring weather, despite that it's late spring, in fact, but the weather is early spring, like 10-15 degrees, not more.
Yeah. It's been a couple of chilly days here in DC as well, so we didn't really have much of a the April was like so throughout.
And it has been very, very rainy in April here.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can start right now, and welcome everybody. Hi, thank you for joining us today, and also welcome to Research Unbound. This is an initiative that we here at Policy and Program Learning at CIPE started this year, which features research and work from scholars and researchers at the intersection of business and government. We try to bring these findings to our partners, donors, and networks with the purpose of sharing lessons and insights, and hope that they inspire some action on strengthening democracy and the crucial role of private sector in delivering equitable economic growth. So as part of this series today, we will talk about the private sector and business in Hungary, and which has been in the news, as we all know. And just as a quick background, over the past decade, Hungary's ruling party, Fidesz, or the long name Alliance of Young Democrats, Hungarian Civic Union, led by Viktor Orban, has really initiated a series of legal and constitutional changes that have challenged the independence of key institutions in the country and the model of market economy and private enterprise. And we're going to talk about this and more today, and based on Jozsef's research and his report on state business relations, which was commissioned by CIPE. Jozsef will offer insights on the many aspects of this and the controversial nature of the business environment in Hungary, including the so-called investment paradox. The discussion will address key questions, for example, such as what have been the mechanisms and limit of state intervention in the Hungarian capitalism hybrid regime undermining market values. How do companies that want fair rules survive and thrive under the current circumstances? And what are some of the strategic implications of the last national elections held on April 3rd for businesses? In this election, as we all know, Viktor Orban and his party were re-elected. So I want to introduce now our guest. Jozsef Peter Martin is an executive director of Transparency International in Hungary, and he's also external senior lecturer at the Institute of Economic and Public Policy at Corvinus University of Budapest. Prior to joining Transparency International in 2013, Jozsef worked extensively as a journalist for 15 years and was chief editor of the Hungarian business weekly Figyelő from 2003 to 2009. He's the author of more than a dozen academic publications and is a regular contributor to various domestic and international publications. We're super excited to have Jozsef joining us today. So Jozsef, welcome, and thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you very much, Mikra, and thank you very much for this opportunity to present my research, which was commissioned by CIPE at this webinar. Good afternoon or good morning to everybody, to all listeners, depending where you are on the planet. For some it's afternoon, for some it's morning. So I will try to share my screen, and then I will start the presentation. I think and I hope that the screen is shared.
It looks fine, Jozsef. Thank you.
Okay, so, and it looks fine. Okay, so I will speak about, as Mikra has just said, about the coping strategies of businesses in Hungary in the context of Hungarian hybrid regime. And also we'll say a couple of words about the strategic implication for businesses after the national election, which was held on 3rd of April this year, so just some weeks ago. The outline of my presentation will be the following. First of all, I will present the context and the methodology of my research. Then I will reveal new aspects of state-business relations. Some of them includes like assessment of business climate by economic players. I will present a very, I would say, obscure lobbying tool, which is called Strategic Partnership Agreement. And also I will speak about, I think, very exciting issue of kind of double division in the Hungarian economy, and also how to survive and how to strive for market-oriented companies in this hybrid regime and in the context of this double division. Last but not least, as I said, I will say a couple of words about the implication of the elections for businesses. And then, obviously, I will conclude. So about the research context, for the non-Hungarians, I just present the country very briefly. So Hungary is a medium-sized and middle-income country in Central and Eastern Europe. Its population is 9.7 million, and the area is 93,000 square kilometers. Hungary is member, as you all know, of nominally high standard international organizations such as European Union or NATO. What is less known, and I should mention because it is very relevant for our research, is that Hungary, after Ireland, is the most heavily dependent EU country on foreign direct investment. So Mikra has already mentioned a couple of words about what happened in Hungary after 2010, when the government led by Fidesz and led by Prime Minister Orbán assumed first a constitutional majority. As I said, or as we have just said, we had an election some weeks ago, and it was the fourth consecutive victory for Viktor Orbán. All of the four were landslide victories, although the elections might be said, at least the last elections, that they were free, although not fair. But that's another issue. This hybrid regime that was built on by Viktor Orbán has challenged the rule of law, the independence of institutions, the media freedom, as well as the Western model of market economy and private enterprise. This all led to blurring of boundaries between state and market. and between the public and private interests. This blurring of boundaries is quite unusual in Western type democracies. So it happened in Hungary for the sake of a very extensive resource reallocation and elite change in the country that I will elaborate in this presentation. About the research methodology, the research and the research parameters. The research was done between September 2021 and January 2022. So the paper, the report was submitted in January 2022 and also accepted by CIPE. We used a combined methodology, which means that I used desk research, descriptive data analysis, and 16 semi-structured interviews with business leaders and experts. Most of them didn't want to disclose their names, and so they are quoted anonymously. Altogether, I had 5 research questions and 2 hypotheses. I won't tell you all the questions and hypotheses. You can read it in the report, which will be published just after this seminar. Just I would mention the most important questions and 1 hypothesis. One crucial question of the research was, so what are the main features of the current Hungarian business environment? Under this question, I hypothesized, based on the existing literature, that because of rule of law backsliding and also the systemic nature of corruption, the Hungarian business environment is perceived as unstable, and it is reflected in declining investments. We will see during this presentation whether this hypothesis proved to be true or wrong. I also put a research question before I started this work. What have been the mechanism and limits of undue state intervention in the Hungarian context, undermining free market values? And also another very important question, how companies that want fair rules, so-called pro-market companies, how they can survive and thrive under the current circumstances. So let's start with the first topic. Let's start with the assessment of the business climate. Here we need to differentiate between at least 2 periods. One is between 2013 until 2020, until the outbreak of the pandemic, when the economic performance was ambiguous in Hungary. We can speak of favorable short-term indicators. It means that the GDP growth was quite substantial. Even there was a real wage increase in the country, and also the main macroeconomic indicators from unemployment through inflation and budget deficit and current account deficit were relatively in good shape. In the meantime, in the same period, so between 2013 and 2020, structural deficiencies of the economy persisted. So we cannot say that these short-term good indicators eliminated the structural problems. In the contrary, these structural problems remained. One of these structural problems in the Hungarian economy has been for a long time the mediocre productivity. If we compare the productivity rate or the increase of productivity among the Visegrad 4 countries, so among the core Central European countries, then we can say that the Hungarian productivity increased the least among these countries. Also, Hungary could not improve its competitiveness. In the contrary, the competitiveness nosedived between the start of this millennium and 2016. So in 2016, Hungary was, according to the World Economic Forum's competitiveness report, on the 69th place. And in 2001, yet Hungary was on the 28th place. So there was a huge decrease of competitiveness. And the most important factor which kind of triggered this slide in competitiveness was the low performance of the institutions. So in institutional pillar of this competitiveness report, which is compiled by the World Economic Forum, Hungary has been performing traditionally very badly in the past 12 years. So in 2020, a new economic cycle started, a kind of downward economic cycle, which was caused obviously by the pandemic. The pandemic proved to be a game changer in the country's economic policy, both on fiscal side and on monetary side. So the fiscal policy has become very loose, and there have been partly due to the pandemic and partly due to the national election, huge government spending, including vote buying ahead of the national election. And in the meantime, the monetary policy has tightened since 2020. If we look at other indicators of the economy, we can say that the growth rate was not at all so nice as it was before 2020, but in 2020, in the year 2020, there was a considerable recession, and then a moderate growth rate was or is projected for this year. Last year there was a growth, but it is due to the huge recession in the year before. And also the other indicators of the economy, the other financial equilibrium indicators such as inflation, budget deficit, state debt have deteriorated considerably in the past 2 years. And an old enemy of the Hungarian economy has reappeared, the twin deficit. By this I mean the deficit of budget deficit and of budget and the current account. So all this ambiguous economic performance has led to a kind of investment paradox. And this is one of the, I believe, most intriguing findings of the current report. So that despite the deterioration of rule of law, despite the democratic backsliding and systemic corruption, the investment rate in Hungary, contrary to our hypothesis, it did not decrease, but it increased. So as I said, we hypothesized that due to the breach of rule of law and the deterioration of business climate in this sense, the investment rate will decrease, but no, it increased at least after 2016. So after 2016, we see a huge increase of investment rate despite the deterioration of rule of law and corruption situation. I call it an investment paradox, which is very striking, I should say. For example, according to World Bank figures, the FDI, the foreign direct investment volume, reached record highs in 2016 and 2019. And if we look at the Eurostat figures, then we can draw the conclusion that the business investment rate, so excluding the state investment, so if we concentrate only to business investments, let there be foreign investments or domestic ones. So this business investment rate was the second highest in the EU in 2019 and rose significantly from 2015 to 2019. And even in 2020 and 2021, it remained at relatively high level despite the recession or the lower growth rate, because the investment were lower, but also the growth rate was lower. So the rate between the two remained unchanged. So the explaining factors of such an investment booms are quite diverse. Based on the research, I revealed 4 basic factors of this investment boom after 2016. One was the extensive state support for crony companies. These were obviously state support, but then the crony companies reinvested some of these state supports. The second was the low or negative interest rates, which in itself boosts the lending capacity and lending activities, and also the borrowing ones. Then we can speak of a new normal, by which I mean, or my interviewees meant, that lots of market players and lots of business players in the Hungarian hybrid regime have simply priced in corruption and state capture and rule of law backsliding, and they consider this as a kind of new normal. 10 or 12 years, it's quite a long period that they do not consider it as a kind of deviation, but as a new normal. And last but not least, we know from the corruption literature that sometimes corruption can grease the wheels of economic growth, and exactly that is happening in the Hungarian context. Because, for example, when we observe the overpricing of public procurements, which generates, of course, corruption rent, which is absolutely undue from point of view of development of the country, but on paper, it boosts investments, and eventually it boosts also growth. So based on the business players' assessment that I captured during this research, the economic environment is ambiguous. On the positive sides, my interviewees talked about the EU membership, which is completely indifferent from the nature of the governance, and lots of interviewees said that this is the biggest positive feature, the most important positive feature of the Hungarian business climate. There was a certain kind of stability, at least until the pandemic, as I depicted. Some mentioned features of tax policy. Some of you might know that Hungary has the lowest corporate rate in Europe, and a flat tax when it comes to income tax. And also some players mentioned the whitening of the economy through online cash machines, and more efficient tax collection than it happened beforehand. On the negative side, however, most of the business players mentioned and stressed the extremely tilted playing field. So the playing field is not leveled at all, and it is tilted in favor of pro-government crony companies. Also, some mentioned the features of tax policy. There are many different tax types and special taxes. Also, corruption, over-centralization. So this government is, I should say, obsessed with centralization, and the Hungarian redistribution rate is the highest in the region. And overall, the politicization of the economy, it also puts the economic or business climate at risk. So in this ambiguous business climate, a new lobbying tool emerged. It was introduced by the government back in 2012, and it is called Strategic Partnership Agreement. This is an obscure lobbying tool designed mostly for multinational companies. At current stage, there are 90 strategic partnership agreements. As the research revealed, this lobbying tool is a kind of anteroom for lobbying, a possibility of cooperation and support. So not a par excellence lobbying tool, but those companies which enter to this anteroom, so they sign this strategic partnership agreement, those companies might have access to much more support and cooperation than those which do not sign or have not signed this agreement, so or were not approached by the government. This tool also allowed the government to differentiate between the good and bad multinational companies. Most probably that was the aim of the government, to differentiate between the good and bad ones, of course, between quotation marks. Why? Because they considered that Hungary needs more companies in the production sector and in the industrial sector, and less companies in service sectors. So the government was much more keen on supporting the industrial companies than the service sector companies. There are always exceptions out of this rule, but that was, or that has been, the general rule. This is rather a communication tool and rather a declaration of interest than a policy tool. It's not a legally binding document, and also it raises lots of transparency and accountability problems, because the hidden deals are not revealed. So in these agreements which went public, there are always very general issues, and only in some cases they mention some concrete provisions. Otherwise, it's a general framework of cooperation that is bylined by the government and by the companies. Here I have to mention that partly due to this tool, there has been an extensive support for the multinational companies, but unfortunately, as my research revealed, it is not reflected in a higher research and development activities or higher value added. All in all, as one of the interviewees said during the research, this instrument was a kind of buying peace tool to legitimize the public funds for companies' support. Here you can see some statistics about how the number of new strategic partnership agreements have been going on since 2012, and also the breakdown of this strategic partnerships agreement by sectors. Here we can see that there have been less and less SPAs over time, which means that this instrument might have reached its natural life cycle. In terms of the sectoral distribution, we can see that the automotive industry is overrepresented. And by the way, if we see the countries of origins of these SPAs, then we can conclude that the German automotive industries are mostly overrepresented, which is quite obvious given the Hungarian context, because the most government support went to this German automotive industry. By the way, in terms of countries of origin, after Germany, the US companies were the second in the distribution across state partnership agreements. This leads us to reveal a new division in the Hungarian economy. But before I reveal this new division, I have to differentiate between 5 types of distinctive actors: the state, multinational companies, the small and medium-sized companies, the so-called crony segment, and substitutes. So what are these 2 main divisions? So the first division, it is quite clear, this is the so-called dual economy, and the Hungarian economy has been always dual since the regime change and since the end of communism. So during the transition process, we could always speak of a dual economy, which basically means a duality between foreign firms, which are much more efficient than the small and medium-sized firms. So the duality between foreign multinational companies and the SMEs, mainly domestic SMEs, this has been persisting for 30 years, more than 30 years now, and it is still on. So this is still the case in the Hungarian economy. If you look at these statistics, you can see that with much more employment, the generated value added is approximately the same. So for the SMEs than for the foreign companies. So the productivity for the SMEs is considerably lower than for the foreign companies or multinational companies. And also there is a very striking difference in terms of export. The export figures show that foreign companies make export activities so their export activities is much stronger than that of the SMEs. So this duality persists, but we revealed another division of the Hungarian economy, the free market players versus the crony companies. It is the consequence of the emergence of a new ownership class. This new ownership class has been recapitalized by the current government through several methods, and mainly by state subsidies. In several sectors of the economies, we can speak straightforwardly about the crony takeover of those sectors. I am speaking here about sectors prone to public procurement, prone to state subsidies, or those which impact directly the voters' behavior, such as the media, or which is prone to imminent profit creation, such as the IT. So in these very sectors, construction, tourism, media, or IT, the crony segment presence is very, very substantial. Even there are sectors, for example, construction, where we do not really find any players, any big players. I mean, any big players which do not belong to this crony segment. What kind of policy tools the government use for this wealth transfer? Favoritism, mainly in public procurements, nationalization followed by reprivatization to crony players, then market manipulation by rigged state regulation, friendly takeover, and hostile takeover. The main features of these crony segments are quite different from the free market segments. That they are over-subsidized by the state, not export-oriented, and provided by generous regulatory support. When it comes to the size and limit of this crony segment, we got during the research totally different perceptions. Some interviewees said that this is a very distinct segment. Even one interviewee said that it's a parallel universe vis-a-vis the free market players. Other interviewees, however, said that the line is much more blurred between the crony segment and the free market segment, because even companies which nominally would belong to the free market segment, they make deals, sometimes hidden deals, with the government. What we know is that the inner circle of the government cross oligarchs, so those 4 or 5 oligarchs, they control around 3% of the GDP. This is not extremely big share. However, if we go down to sectors, then the accessible market for true market players might have decreased by 20–30%, as I said, or even more if it comes to the construction sector. 20–30%, for example, in the advertisement sector. So it varies from sector to sector, but for the whole economy, I would say that in per sector, mostly this 20–30% is the share which is controlled.
Jozsef,
next question. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. This is all fascinating, and we have a lot of questions from the audience. So I was wondering if perhaps we can try to wrap it up in the next few minutes, so that we leave some time for discussion and questions.
Sure. So I will speed up. How to survive and prosper in this context. So here I got the answer from the market players, mainly that export orientation can be a good strategy, and also to minimize business relation with the government. What are the strategic implications of the last election for businesses? I think the most important challenge for businesses, this was not part of the research, just I was asked to include that because of the election which were held just some weeks ago. So most important challenge, I think, the downward economic cycle, and in the meantime that the EU funds are being at stake. Here, the biggest question will be that after having triggered the rule of law mechanism by the European Commission, what will happen with this altogether approximately 40 billion euros, which Hungary in principle would be entitled in the next 7 years. If the money will not flow in, then the Hungarian economy will be in serious trouble. And obviously the war in Ukraine poses an extremely big risk, both from security point of view and also from economic point of view. And then I conclude. So there has been an ambivalent business environment, as I elaborated. The autocratic growth in these kinds of hybrid regime may exist in good times, but when the good times ends, it may be seriously at risk in hard times. This regime is characterized by over-centralization and preferential treatment for loyal business players, which leads or has led to tilted playing field. The multinational companies or most of multinational companies with SPAs, with these partnership agreements and beyond, have made deals with the government in order to turn higher profit. The chronic segment of the economy is a kind of parallel universe vis-à-vis the market segment, and has reduced the accessible market. And the pledge for survival is and prosperity to minimize business relation with the government. All this confronted us with very important empirical contradiction, that neither the fact that Hungary has belonged for many years to nominally high standard organizations such as the EU and the NATO, and also that there has been a high share of foreign ownership, this all have not mattered much so far when it comes to rule of law backsliding and the erosion of market mechanisms. So that is the overall conclusion of the research. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jozsef. This was fascinating, and I really did enjoy reading the paper. And I just want to follow up with a quick question on one of the findings that I found so striking is this idea of multinationals, especially foreign companies, actually the ones who invest heavily in Hungary. And that in your paper, you say that some of them turn a blind eye to the erosion of democracy and the challenge, to key institutions in Hungary. Is there a sense as to how one deals with this humongous challenge? How do you navigate that kind of environment, that kind of space between companies who you obviously want to bring in, but at the same time you want to challenge? Is civil society there? Do they play a role there? And how do you deal with this problem?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Of course, it's very relevant. So first of all, I should add that most of multinational companies have turned blind eye because they could make profit. So if the time comes when they cannot make profit, then I think the sensitivity vis-a-vis rule of law backsliding and systemic corruption will increase. So that is the projection, and this time might have already come in the Hungarian context. But that's true that unfortunately, not only this research, but several other researches on behalf of Transparency International and also on behalf of other analysts, confirmed that most of multinational companies, and of course there are always exceptions, but most of multinational companies were not really interested in these kinds of problems. So what the civil society can do with this situation? On behalf of TI Hungary, we have still had several cooperation with the multinational companies and with this segment of the economy. For example, we have done several consultancy work and also some trainings on corporate ethics, for example, for the multinationals. And also we have had a tool about the disclosure about the public disclosure of companies, the so-called track tool, transparency of corporate disclosure. Based on this tool, we have assessed the corporate disclosure methods and practice of multinational companies. We ranked them, and also we made trainings with some of the companies. My experience is that these companies are keen on elevate their standards of integrity and transparency, and have been less keen to put anti-corruption as such to the focus. So transparency, integrity, yes, in most of the cases, anti-corruption only in few cases.
Has there been any case that you know of, or examples, or is there a movement where civil society tries to sort of rally business support to challenge, to challenge the push against, erosion of democracy or challenging these institutions? Is there a sense in Hungary that these two can work together, like civil society and private sector in pushing against this huge challenge?
Yeah, so in principle and logically, my answer should be yes, of course. But in the reality, I think that not I think, but that was my experience or our experience. And here I'm talking not only on behalf of TI, but also on behalf of other civil societies, civil society organizations. Our experience was that the economy is so much, or has so much been politicized in Hungary, that these firms, or most of these firms, have been very, very reluctant to engage with government critical civil society organizations. There might have been one or two sporadic exceptions, but very, very rarely. So when you go beyond the transparency and the integrity questions, which they are keen on elevate, but when you go beyond that, then that it's very, very difficult to engage or any kind of cooperation.
Yeah. We have a number of questions from audience, so I'm just gonna start reading them to you. One of them is about the implications of the dual economy and for future development and strategy and political economy. The question is, are there export opportunities for Hungarian quote-unquote free market companies, given that the crony companies are focused on the domestic market? So are there...
I understand the question.
Okay.
And it's very good question. Of course. So here two statements should be made. One is that the Hungarian economy is very strongly export-oriented. This is a good news for the Hungarian economy. If it was not the case, I think the situation would have been much worse in every respect of the economy, in growth rate and everything. So that is one thing. The second thing is that yes, as as it is stated in the question as well, the domestic, the crony segment of the economy, it is not export oriented. So that gives its vulnerability. So here the scheme is that the state supports these crony segments with huge amount of money, but there are very, very few of these companies that can go abroad, that can go west, or that they can sell their products or services abroad. They are prone to domestic sales. And this gives a big vulnerability, first of all, to this crony segment, but this is a less problem. The bigger problem is that for the whole Hungarian economy, because once the state cannot give this extensive support, if for example the EU funds will not flow in as they did beforehand. So if the state cannot be so generous with this crony segment, then they might, lots of these companies might go simply bankrupt. There are several examples of it. There is oligarch or a former oligarch who fell out with the prime minister back in 2015. Until that time, he got lots of public procurements and lots of subsidies from the state, their companies. And once he fell out, he doesn't get any public procurements, and basically their companies have gone bankrupt, and he had to withdraw from the business activities.
So related to that, Jozsef, I mean, I want to read you another question from another member of the audience about the strategy of survival, which includes, minimizing any sort of like business dealings or relations with government. And the question is, can you please elaborate more on this? Does this mean that the business sector will not work in public procurement / competitions? Does this imply that oligarchs can continue capturing the state?
Yeah, so these are two different questions. I will speak about the state capture later, and about the survival strategies. So lots of my interviewees, among them there were several top 50 or even top 20 businessmen or entrepreneurs. They explicitly said to me that they urge their companies not to take part in public procurement. So this is in public procurement. So they want to stay away from the state as much as it is possible. So this is one strategy. The other strategy, and I encountered that strategy as well during my research. This was a kind of much more muddling through approach, that they do some public procurements, but so they make some deals with the government, but those companies much more depend on the domestic market. So it also in connection with the export orientation. If a firm can afford itself that only sells its products abroad, or to such extent export oriented, then that company refrains from public procurements entirely. Those who are prone to sell their products and services on the market, they can afford themselves less to stay as away as it is possible, but the intention might be the same. And of course, it depends on the attitude of the entrepreneur of the management, whether they can they want to make deals or not. And let's say it was even the political attitudes of these managers might be taken into account. About the state capture question, so the Hungarian state capture is not an oligarchical state capture. This is not the oligarchs who have captured the state, but the politicians capture the state. More precisely, this is an obscure network consisting of politicians and oligarchs, an obscure and informal network which has captured the state, and in which the final say is always said by the prime minister. So this is the model of the Hungarian state capture. This might be labeled as political state capture, contrary to the oligarchical state capture. So it's not the Babiš case. So with an international comparison, when Babiš ruled in Czechia, that state capture was a classical oligarchical state capture. The archetype of the oligarchical state capture is the Yeltsin's Russia. The archetype of political state capture is Putin's Russia. So the Hungarian state capture is a political state capture. Oligarchs play a role, but the oligarch's role is a subordinated role to the government and to the prime minister, apart from probably one businessman or one oligarch who might sometimes challenge Prime Minister Orbán. The others are entirely subordinated to him.
Again, so many interesting questions, but I'm, just related to your last question on the capture of and takeover, crony takeover by the elites. The question is, which sectors have been less prone to that kind of takeover from government? And if so, if they've been able to resist this capture by government, what do you think has enabled them to do so? What has enabled sectors, if there are such sectors that haven't been captured yet by the government, what has enabled them to resist that push?
Okay, so first of all, when we speak about capture of the government, we are not speaking of the nationalization per se, because it exists as well. But this, as I try to show, this is only one tiny part of the story. So when we speak of the capture of the sector, then we speak of the capture of nominally private entities, but not all the sectors are captured. Those sectors which are export oriented, so for example in the FMCG sector, and less prone to regulation, less prone to any kind of the public procurement inside Hungary, then they are much less captured. The more the sectors or the companies are prone to regulation and public procurement, then they are the more captured. But we cannot say that the whole economy is captured. We cannot even say that the whole economy is kind of influenced by this crony segment. So there is a free part of free market part of the economy, but unfortunately it is not as big as it should be in a Western type market economy.
Yeah, that's great. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for this, and we reached the end of the hour. But I hope to continue this conversation with you and all those who join us after this. We will share your research paper with our audience, published in our website. But in the meantime, I just wanted to thank you for being here today, and I want to thank everybody who found time from their busy schedules to be with us also. And thank you all for your questions. This was a fascinating conversation as part of our Research Unbound webinar series. So one more time, Jozsef, thank you so much. This was eye-opening for me in so many respects. I learned so much, and I hope that you will continue to share this research with us, and we will share the research with the audience as well. So thank you again, and please, just as a reminder, just put in the chat, Tamari, please fill out the evaluations here if you can, and let us know how we're doing and whether we how we can improve this further. So once again, thank you all, and please have a wonderful day. And we'll speak soon, Jozsef.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the attention, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Thanks.
Have a great day, everybody.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.